Hello, lovelies. Welcome to tonight's live. I am very, very excited to be here. I am, yes, just waiting for a few people to join. So, very excited. This is brand new from me, I guess. A long time coming, though. So, I've had a lot of people talk to me about the podcast, and lots of people love the podcast, but there are some people who do not love a podcast. Plus, it did dawn on me earlier this week that there's a reason why there aren't that many knitting audiobooks because knitting is something you see. So I thought I would jump on here, do a recap of the episode so nobody misses out, answer any questions as well because there's kind of a podcast is kind of one way, so there's loads of chance for people to ask questions if you're joining me live. And then I'm going to show you what I was on my needles. So I thought I would do this every Thursday because the podcast goes out on Tuesdays. And then if you are watching this later on as a catch up, hello, it's also going to go up on the YouTube channel as well. So I'm not going to go back and do the first 26 episodes of the podcast, but if you have been listening, do let me know if you have any questions. You will find the podcast show notes at knitschool.co.uk/podcast. And if you search for Get Knit Done on Shopify, Apple Podcasts, etc., you'll find it there and you can subscribe. Do subscribe because it means that you will get the episodes automatically downloaded when they come out on a Tuesday. With that said, I'm going to move on and talk about what I was talking about this week on the podcast. And if you do have any questions, stop me as we go. So I was talking about, I was supposed to originally be talking about something else, but I like a change. So I was talking about the three most important aspects of knitting pattern design. Not really, it's more about how you do them as opposed to what they are, and how you kind of go about doing them as a priority rather than them being important. Because when I say the first one, you're going to be like, well, that is obviously the most important point. So the three things I think, there are, excuse me, the hiccups. There are three things. There is knitting, the actual design, how you go about designing, and that's something that people ask me all the time. The second thing is pattern writing itself and how you go about doing that, and then marketing and selling. Now, pattern writing and marketing and selling are more around if you plan to make a business out of being a knitting pattern designer. But the majority of people that ask me about pattern design are people who are thinking about going on and maybe writing a pattern in it. I know it's not specifically knitting, but I have to say there's nothing more liberating. Liberating. Not sure liberating is the right word. What word do I want? Empowering, I guess, than writing your own knitting patterns. Because I remember when I started, and I've said this loads of times, people must be tired of it, sick to the back teeth of me saying it, but I never thought I would write knitting patterns when I started the Loveliest Yarn Company, and now I have like more than 50 of them, which weirds me out quite a bit. But I have to say, the more patterns I designed, the better a knitter I became, as well, which they tie into one another really nicely. So the better a knitter you become in a way, and that's part two, is kind of how much better a designer you could be. Although that's a bit controversial, not controversial, but I don't think everybody would agree with that, and I'm sure that lots of people won't agree with that's what I say, but that's fine. So the one thing that I found really tricky, and I'm going to talk about design first, the process of design, because I think that's one of the hardest things to pin down. I did a little bit of research and I was looking at how, say, fashion designers do it, and a lot of it is around inspiration, mood boards, inspiration boards, kind of what you think of as inspiring. For some people, though, it's about just seeing things totally unrelated to clothing or knitting or anything and then turning those into them. But again, all of that is how you gather ideas and what you see and what you read and how that impacts what you will eventually go on and design. My process is slightly different to that in that I am driven by what I'm going to design. So the vast majority of the times I have something that I'm going to design specifically for. So I know, for example, for Knit School a lot, I plan out for the year the type of designs I want based on what I'm going to teach. So I know I'm going to have to teach something. I'm going to have to design something that will teach what I want to do so people can use the skills after their thought. And the second thing is that they're going to be accessible to people who are novice to advanced knitters and be relatively interesting in there. I also have the fact that I want to make the best use of yarn as well. So I don't want to do things that have like 9 or 10 100-gram skeins of 4-ply. I want to make them affordable. Sometimes I ask myself if that's the right approach because you're looking into people's wallets, but I something I do myself. Plus, now that I don't have a shop anymore, I might have to buy yarn for my design. So we'll see how that goes. You'll be seeing me using the last 200 like meters, or not 200 meters, the last like 2 milligrams of stuff now that I'm doing that. So that's my process, is what am I going to design? And a lot of the things that I've done to set myself up for that is I look at the shape of hats, the shapes of jumpers, how they're formed. And as I knit anything by anyone, I look at how they've constructed it. So for example, I'm actually wearing a Tin Can Knits Lush. It's constructed in such a way that it is it's cowl increases. So I've looked at how they do those increases, because yes, specific designs, the way that they've done this and the way the neck and everything is picked up and the lace piece in it is proprietary, the shape of sweaters is generally the same. So if you're looking at becoming a sweater designer, knitting a few sweaters and seeing how they're structured or reading about them is a really good idea. And I know that a lot of people might think that's a very boring approach to design, but actually it depends on how your brain works. And I recommend the Adobe Creative Quiz. It'll tell you what kind of creative you are, and that made me feel quite good, because I'm not arty, or I don't see myself as like, I see a thing and then I visualize it and I turn it into a pattern. I wish I was, but I am not. So it kind of is a method of like working out what works for you if you go to design. So are you someone who sees things and can convert them into patterns? Like somebody like, I think Belinda Harris-Reid and Marna from Uncutting Biog fit into that category. If you guys are listening to me, by the way, please free to join in. I see them as people who see things and then turn them into amazing designs. Whereas for me, I'm more structured about it. Not that they're not structured, but I have to be structured because I don't have a particular eye for certain things. I also have dozens of Pinterest boards. I use Pinterest all the time for it. I think it's actually one of its main uses in my life. I will save stitch patterns and shapes and geometric shapes. So for example, at the moment I'm designing a mosaic. I haven't decided if it's a shawl or if, well, it's going to be a wrap, I think. A wrap, a cushion cover, or something that can be converted, or a blanket. But I know that I need geometric shapes and kind of squares, so I've saved off loads of like vector graphics so that I can go and make stitch patterns out of those. Tend not to save as many knitting pattern designs because I'm very cautious about copying anybody's ideas, but then I will save off sweaters by let me think, any designer you can name really. I'll save off sweaters and tops and stuff like that, so that I can say, right, this will make a great knitting pattern. I actually have a Pinterest board. You'll find it under the Loveliest Yarn Company as it's called Patterns That Will I think it's Patterns That Will One Day Be a Knitting Pattern. And I'm like, I want those. I don't know if I'll ever write some of them. I don't know if I have the skill. Which actually brings me nicely on. If you are with me live, don't hesitate to ask any questions as well. If you are, and if you're watching this on catch up as well, put comments in and I can answer them afterwards as well, particularly if you're on Facebook or if you're watching later on YouTube. So the next thing is question I get as well is, how good a knitter do I need to be? Like, that takes me really nicely into pattern writing. So I don't like to put people off, but I think with pattern writing, you do need a certain level of knitting knowledge so that you know how your design can be converted into knitting, because it's fine to have an idea, but you need to be able to knit it. And then you need to be able to take that knitting and turn it into a set of relatively good, concise instructions that follow quite a standard pattern. Now, most of the people in this group will have knit from a variety of knitting patterns by a variety of designers, and you'll probably have in your mind a favourite set of patterns, so somebody whose patterns you find really knittable. And that's actually the goal of a knitting pattern is if I give this knitting pattern, including the pictures, the schematics, the yarn details, etc., is will the person who knits this pattern, will they get exactly what I'm promising them that they will get? And that's a question that if you're designing a pattern, always answer that question. If you look at a pattern and it doesn't give you everything you need, bar some skills, which I'll talk to you in a second about, then the knitting pattern isn't fit for purpose. That's what I think. The one gap there, I think, is you have a difference between being a knitting pattern designer and educating people about knitting, and there's a small bit of a crossover in there. You should describe the techniques that you're using, but do you want to teach everybody every piece of those techniques? That depends on kind of where you are in whatever way you feel. Like if you look at some of the patterns that you follow, you won't always get detailed instructions of everything. there will be a certain level of assumed knowledge. If you are assuming knowledge, do put it into the descriptions of your patterns before people buy them so they know that they require certain skills. Just a recommendation. I've seen a lot of patterns actually that link to YouTube tutorials that are not the designer's own, but are belong to other people as well, so you can do that too. So it's a balance to be struck between it. So yeah, that's the kind of, does my pattern answer all of these questions? After that, you don't have to have all the skills up front. So you might have enough skills to design a hat, but you might not have them to do a sweater. There's a lot more goes into one than into the other. And that's something you can develop as well. So I couldn't have sat down 5 years ago when I wrote the Touch Me shawl and written my British cardigan. Absolutely no way. To be fair, when I sat down to write the British cardigan, I was just about ready to write it. If you listen to the episode 25, I think, of the podcast, you'll see how ready I was not ready to write it. But again, there's skills that can be developed. And if you think I don't know now, you can develop them in phases. Really good book to investigate in is invest in, if you are doing this on a kind of a serious level, is Kate Atterley's Beginner's Pattern Design Writing book. I link it actually in the show notes for the podcast, which you will find at knitschool.co.uk/episode 27. And that is a really good book. It's a book I found myself. And she tells you all of the kind of standard things that you should put into a pattern. Like, you're expecting to know how much yarn, what weight yarn, what needles, what notions, what schematics, what images are good, like pattern instructions, etc. So all the stuff that comes before the pattern, including abbreviations, and all the stuff that comes after it. I think that's something to be aware of as well. As you can start, if you think, I might fancy it in the future, but I don't fancy it now, gather together all of the information that you think would look good in a pattern and keep it together from the patterns that you have, because you can actually learn a little bit about that. In terms of getting the abbreviation standard lists and templates as well, I definitely recommend starting as you need to go on. I have not always, but I'll tell you now that I have a list of standard abbreviations that I use all the time. It's such a relief to be able to go in and pick out, like, say, a make one left. I go in, I copy it. It's always the same description of a make one left. My tech editor has seen it. She has agreed it's right, and it fits right into my patterns. It's also how I describe them if I'm doing a video tutorial for them. But that is something, again, I'm a bit like, don't block yourself, but always think, can I set myself up to do a good job? Which is something kind of I always recommend for business. But if that's kind of the thing, so that's design and then pattern writing, two technically quite separate skills. And actually I find some people who love one may not like the other, and some people who like the one, or the one might not, and then you might find you actually don't like either of them. That's totally separate. The next thing then, my dears, is around marketing and selling. Now this is really if you are planning to go out and sell your patterns. And this, again, question I get a lot, and it's not one I have a definitive answer to, because I have not mastered the art of the pattern sale. So I have all right pattern sales, and I have some lovely fine folk who are with me in the Knit Matters Facebook group, and you guys are kind enough to buy my patterns when I release them, when I remember to release them. I have a newsletter, people buy them there. I sell them through lots of things, but my primary reason for pattern writing now is for Knit School. But if you want to become a designer, you do need to start thinking about who is going to buy my patterns and how am I going to tell them about my patterns. And that's actually what marketing and selling is. So a really good business coach recently, her name is Karen Kasane, and she said that all selling is, for those of us who feel like it's sleazy, is someone has a problem and they'd like a solution. So I want to knit a pair of nice simple socks. Oh, here we go. I have a Simply the Sock pattern for you. Really nice way of connecting them. So it is something to think about. And now, there are 1,000 social media channels. There are 1,000 ways to do content. Like, I'll be very candid. I'm here with you tonight, talking to you, so that you see me on camera. And will hopefully like me enough to join Knit School, or be part of my community, or buy my patterns, or also so that you'll talk to me at shows. I have an ulterior motive in all this too. I like people. But it's that kind of thing. It's how do you engage people in such a way that they will see you as someone that they would buy a knitting pattern from. I'm not going to ask the question, do you see me as someone you'd buy a knitting pattern from? Because I'm not sure I can handle the answers. So that's what I was talking about on the podcast. 3 things. It's how you set up to design, and you can put in processes in place if you're like me and you're a bit paranoid that you're not that creative. The second is pattern writing, and there are skills that you can develop as you go along, but you do need a base set of skills. And the third is marketing and selling. Oh, I could go on forever about that, but actually you know what, sometimes some people's stuff will be so amazing it'll catch immediately, but for me, I'm kind of, what do I think of myself as, kind of workhorse of pattern design. Simple, no, not simple. Straightforward, knittable, but definitely not going to set the world on fire. It's kind of a place for all of us. And obviously then how and where you sell those, there's 1,000 marketplaces like Ravelry, Etsy, Payhip, blah, blah, blah. And I think at some point I might, and if anyone is interested, do pop a message in the comments. I am thinking about writing a very basic, get your first pattern out there course. But sometimes I feel like a bit of a fraud on it, because although I have 50 patterns, I still haven't had what I would consider to be like an epic seller. So say for, I've had a few patterns appear in Hot Right Now number in the first page, but I've definitely never had anything that is kind of, that peaks and pops up, and you'll see them kind of pop up and down on Hot Right Now page 1 quite a lot. I've never had one of those, so I feel like a bit of a fraud. But if you want the technicalities and the details and the processes and the systems that go around them, I would definitely be happy to write that. I'm doing something like that for Knit School a little bit later on this year, June, July-ish, for Knit School members. But that is to be decided how much detail goes into that. So that was what was on the podcast, my dears. Next week, I'll be back with you talking about a book I read called Hyperfocus. I'm actually not finished it, which is why this episode, 27, was not about it. And it's actually about how you make space in your head for learning things and focusing on knitting. Because it was actually about a business thing. Because I'm a flipperty-gibbet. I like shiny things and I find it hard to concentrate. I've been working on that this year for myself. But as I was reading the book, I thought this is really applicable to knitting. So I'll be back to talk about that next week. And now, what's on my needle section that I don't have on the podcast, because I feel like holding up knitting as I record a podcast is a bit weird. Although some people do it and it works for them. I don't have a lot of knitting at the moment. I'm looking at them here and there are very, very few things. I think I have 4 works in progress. Just 4. As I hold up 3 fingers. Anyway, we won't talk about that. It's Thursday late. I have to confess, one of them is almost a non-whip. It is about to become a faux. I have a pair of socks. This is simply the simplest sock in my yak yarn. My very last skein of Banshee Yarns yak sock happened to be in Ruba, which is a colourway I named after my dad. So I have knit him a pair of socks in my very last colour of Banshee Yarns yak sock. No, yak sock may appear in 6 months' time. We shall see about Banshee Yarns. We still haven't decided where exactly the future of that is, because even though I know where the loveliest yarn company is, I have no idea about Banshee Yarns yet. But I have a pair of socks for my dad in my, I know I'm a bit of a sentimentalist. I am total soppy thing. And the good news is I have just enough yarn to make 2 more squares for my patchwork quilt blanket, which I will release actually outside Knit School at some point. The next thing I have, and it will surprise nobody, is a sock. Just one more sock. The leg of a sock at the moment, becoming a sock. Then I have one more sock. Nobody's surprised. This is my single colour version of my this and that sock. And it was funny, as I was knitting it, I realised that I had made an adjustment for the colour change. So when you go from the cuff to the leg. And I realised that I needed to change it if you were going to knit in a single colour, because it has a single running rib. Whereas if you knit it in a single colour, it doesn't make any real difference. In the colour change, I had put in a knit row, because when you go from a knit to a purl, you didn't want the ugly colour bumps in the colour change. But when you're knitting it in a single colour, you can actually go straight into the rib, and I think it's actually nicer. So that's my this and that socks. I think this is sock number 1. I don't know if that's left or right, but I'm knitting it at the moment. It's in one of the very last of my, can't remember, my 85 wool 15% nylon that I absolutely love. I'm going to have to buy more of that undyed for myself. Shh, say nothing. And then I have one more project. It is the Changing Light shawl. So if you haven't seen a Changing Light, this is one I did in, I've knit this a few times. I like to find a pattern I love and keep knitting it. This is my Changing Light in Coop Knit Socks yarn, which I'm pretty pleased about. I think it's nice. It was inspired by Marna's Cat Garden socks, because of the colours of the socks. Yeah, it's knit in a square from the centre out. I will post a link to my pinhole cast on, which I hated when I learned it, but now I love it. So I'll post that, because it's knit from the centre out. I'm knitting it again in 3 Skeins of Undyed, which I bought for something completely different, but then I decided I wanted to knit it again. But I've gone up a size, so I did some mats to make it one size bigger because I wanted to make it a little bit of a bigger shawl. So that's it. Honestly, this is yak silk in the center, angel, which is cashmere wool, no, cashmere alpaca silk, and the two outside colors in a paler grey and a cream. Yeah, so that's all I'm knitting at the moment. I know. So, my dears, if you fancy the podcast, I will put some links in the comments below. The podcast is knitschool.co.uk/podcast. You'll also find it at Getting It Done, which you'll find on Apple, Spotify. If you use Global Player, it's in lots of places. Actually, if you have Audible as well, you should be able to download it from Audible. I'm not sure that it's funny because I listen to a lot of audiobooks, but I forget about Audible for podcasts. Very strange. And yeah, that's kind of where you can find the podcast. If you want to take the Knit School quiz, which was something I was talking about last week at the podcast, you will find that if you go to knitschool.co.uk, you can take the Knit School quiz, which it'll tell you kind of what level of knitter you are and where you could kind of go next on your knitting journey. But enough about that, my dears. I must pop off now because I have Knit and Natter with Knit School at 8 o'clock. And thank you so much for joining me for this. I am hopeful that this will go on every Thursday night. So I would love if more people join me. If you have any questions, let me know. So yeah, I will see you guys next week. I'll be around the Facebook group though between now and then. There'll be no doubt. And next week I will be sharing details of something very exciting that is coming up at the end of March. But more details for that later on. So take care, my dears. Thank you for joining me on this Thursday night, and I will see you all really soon.